to Loom of dreams. This is a place where stories are woven softly, thread by thread, until they become a blanket of quiet comfort around you. Here we slow down together. We listen, we breathe, and we rest. As you settle into this moment, let your body grow a little heavier, your thoughts a little lighter. The day has done enough. There's nothing left to rush, nothing you need to hold on to, only the gentle rhythm of your breath and the warmth of the evening around you. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a few moments to settle the body and quiet the mind. If you'd like, close your eyes now. Let the rest of the world fade a little. Notice where you are, the shape of the room, the stillness of the air, the gentle warmth that surrounds you. Now, take a slow breath in through your nose. Feel your chest lift and your belly rise. And then slowly breathe out through your mouth, as if you're blowing warm air onto a window. Let your shoulders drop and feel that breath leave gently, like a sigh. Again, inhale softly, not too deep, just enough to feel the cool air enter. Pause for a moment and exhale slowly. Each time you breathe, imagine the air moving like a wave, in and out, steady and kind. Your body begins to understand this rhythm, the same rhythm as a calm sea at night, the same rhythm as the fire in the hearth. If your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Just notice it and bring it back to your breath, back to the sound of the fire, back to the quiet in your room. Now feel your body growing heavier, your hands resting loosely, your jaw unclenching, your eyes softening behind closed lids. Let your breath find its own pace. There's nothing you need to do. You are safe, you are home, and you are ready to rest. Tonight, we'll return to a small wooden house tucked high above a Norwegian fjord on the second day of a winter storm. Outside, the world is wrapped in deep, drifting snow. Roads are closed, the town is hushed, and the wind has settled into a soft, steady hum around the eaves. Inside, the lights are low and golden. Porridge steams on the table, and 3 generations share a slow, quiet morning together. When Liv woke, the quiet in the attic bedroom sounded different. It wasn't the soft, open silence of an ordinary winter morning with distant sounds drifting in from the town, faint and recognizable. It was thicker than that, as if someone had put a blanket over the whole house and gently pressed. For a moment, she lay still beneath the covers, listening. The wind was still there, but its voice had changed. Instead of sharp gusts rattling at the eaves, she heard a steady, padded roar, like the sea heard through several closed doors. Every now and then there was a faint thump somewhere in the roof or the walls, snow sliding, settling, reshaping itself against the wooden shell of the cottage. She turned her head toward the window. From the bed, she could usually see a rectangle of gray or blue, depending on the weather, and the faintest suggestion of the cliffs beyond. Now there was only a narrow, bright strip of light right at the top of the frame, where the glass hadn't yet been completely covered. The rest was a flattened, milky white. Curious, she pushed back the quilts and swung her feet to the floor. The wood was cool under her socks, but not cold. The warmth from last night's fire had crept up the stairwell at some point and lodged itself in the boards. She pulled on a thick sweater, ran her fingers quickly through her hair, and padded over to the window. Up close, the effect was more dramatic. Snow had piled up along the outside of the glass in rounded waves, pressed against it like the side of a sleeping animal. Only that slim band at the top let in the light, and even that was softened, as if it had traveled through layers and layers of cotton before reaching her. Beyond the glass, where she should have been able to see the outline of the neighbor's roof and the tops of the trees, there was only blur. The shapes were there, but softened into pale suggestions. The whole town, she thought, must look like a model someone had gently shaken and then set down inside a frosted globe. She watched, just long enough to see a few more flakes drift down in the narrow visible strip, slow, deliberate, as if the storm had stopped hurrying and was now simply continuing. Her body felt pleasantly heavy with sleep. The memory of the night before came back to her in small pieces. The warmth of the kitchen, the glow of the fire, the feel of the diary in her hands, and that quiet, unexpected sense that something in her life had turned slightly, without any noise or drama. The thought that this might be the beginning of a new chapter rested somewhere in her chest, faint but steady, like an ember under ash. Below, she could hear the house waking up. Floorboards creaked, not sharply, but with the same muffled quality the wind had now. There was the clink of crockery, a cupboard closing, the gentle thud of something set down on a table, and then, drifting up through the vents and the gaps in the boards, came the familiar, comforting smell of oats warming with milk and a hint of coffee. Liv smiled to herself. Whatever the storm decided to do today, the house had already chosen. It would make breakfast. She opened the bedroom door and stepped out into the narrow hallway. The air was cooler here, the chill from the roof a little more present. But as she went down each step, the temperature rose again, like walking toward a small, quiet sun.
The light in the stairwell was dim and soft, coming from the partly covered windows downstairs. At the bottom of the steps, she paused for a heartbeat, listening once more to that padded roar outside, and then turned toward the kitchen. The sight that met her was as reassuring as the smells. Solveig was standing at the stove, wearing her usual thick cardigan over her dress, wooden spoon in hand. A large pot of porridge simmered gently in front of her, steam curling up in slow, graceful ribbons. The old radio sat on the counter by the window, its dial glowing faintly. Liv's mother was at the table, elbows lightly resting on the worn wood, fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee. Her hair was loosely pinned up, a few strands escaping and catching the soft morning light. On the radio, a calm voice was delivering the morning update. The tone was the same one Liv remembered from other storms, other winters, professional, measured, as if the speaker were guiding everyone through a series of slow, careful steps. Main roads remain officially closed, and side streets are still considered unsafe for travel. Snowplows are working to clear essential routes, but residents are advised to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. Please avoid non-essential journeys and check on neighbors by phone if possible. Liv's mother reached forward and turned the volume down a little, so the words slipped into the background like another layer of weather. "Morning," she said, looking up with a small smile. "Morning," Liv replied, moving automatically to the hook by the door to hang her sweater more securely, and then crossing to the sink to wash her hands. So they glanced over her shoulder, eyes crinkling. "Ah," she said, "our attic owl is awake. I was listening to the storm. It sounds different today, like it put on extra blankets." "That's because it did," Solveig answered, turning back to the pot and giving it a slow stir. She nodded toward the window above the sink. From here, Liv could see that the snow had risen almost halfway up the glass. Only the top edge was free, showing a sliver of the pale sky. "The announcer says we should stay inside," her mother added, lifting the coffee mug to her lips. "No bakery today. No errands, no pretending we might pop down to the harbor for fresh air." Liv leaned her hip against the counter and looked from the window to the table, taking in the scene. Bowls were already set out, 3 of them in a row, each with a neat spoon beside it. A small dish of brown sugar stewed in the middle, along with a jar of lingonberry jam and a little bowl of butter that had softened in the warmth. "So we're still snowed in," she said softly. "We're not snowed in," Solveig corrected her mildly, turning off the heat under the pot. "We are being properly tucked in. There's a difference." She lifted the lid, and the kitchen filled with the gentle, creamy scent of cooked oats, a hint of cinnamon rising with the steam. With practiced movements, she ladled porridge into each bowl, adding a small pat of butter to the top of Liv's, where it began to melt and pool in a golden circle. they sat down together, almost in the same arrangement as the night before, only with morning light instead of lamplight, and the faint, distant voice of the radio instead of the wind's more insistent howl. For a few moments, there was only the quiet routine of breakfast, spoons dipping, the soft tap against porcelain, the occasional clink of a mug being set down on the table. The porridge was thick and comforting, the sweetness of sugar and jam mingling with the salt and warmth in a way that settled inside her, anchoring her to the chair, to the room, to this exact moment. When they had eaten a few spoonfuls, her mother nodded toward the radio. "They say the plows are starting on the main road along the fjord, but our little lane isn't on the list yet. It might be a while." Liv imagined the narrow road that curved down from their cottage to the town, right now probably nothing more than a suggestion under deep, drifted snow. The idea of cars trying to move through it felt almost comical. "So we're not going anywhere today," she said. "No," her mother agreed, but there was no frustration in her voice. "Not unless we absolutely have to." Solveig blew gently on a spoonful of porridge, then let it slip back into the bowl. "You know," she said, her eyes taking on the distant softness they did when she was reaching back through time, "there was a winter when we were more or less stuck here for 3 weeks." Liv looked up in surprise. 3 weeks? Solveig's mouth curved. The snow just kept coming. Not like this, all at once. It would pause, and you'd think, that must be enough. And then it would start again. The plows did what they could, but every time they cleared a path, the wind came and rearranged things. "What did you do?" Liv asked. Solveig shrugged one shoulder. "We stayed home," she said simply. "We burned wood, we baked, we read, we listened to the radio when it worked, and when it didn't, we told each other stories. Time got very long and very small at the same time." Her eyes went to the window, to the snow pressed up close. "I don't remember feeling trapped," she went on after a pause. "I remember feeling held, like the weather had decided we should rest and was determined to make sure we did." In Oslo, when trains were delayed or plans fell through, she had often felt trapped, penned in by timetables and crowded platforms, always aware of where she was supposed to be next. Here, in this snow-wrapped house, the idea that they had nowhere else to go did not bring that same tightness to her chest. It loosened something instead. She thought of the diary upstairs, of the lines she had read about wanting a life that felt like it belonged to her. She thought of the quiet feeling last night that this winter might be the beginning of a new chapter, even if she didn't yet know its title. Maybe, she considered, this was the first lesson of it. Learning how to stay. Learning how to let a single house, a single room, expand enough to hold an entire day. She took another spoonful of porridge, letting the warmth spread through her. The storm could cover roads and blur the outlines of the town as much as it pleased. Inside, the three of them had time and heat and a simple breakfast they didn't have to rush through. Anyway, Solveig said lightly, breaking the little silence that had fallen, if we had to be stuck somewhere, I'd rather it be here, with the pantry full, than halfway to the city in a bus with cold feet. Liv's mother smiled, spoken like someone who has actually been halfway to the city in a bus with cold feet. Oh, more than once, Solveig replied, but that's a story for later, after we've had second coffee. They all smiled at that. Outside, the wind pressed its muffled roar against the walls. Inside, they finished their bowls, refilled coffee, and began to talk. Slow, unhurried talk about nothing urgent, about whether the birds had found enough to eat before the snow came, about the way the snow might look from the cliffs, about what they could bake if they decided they wanted something sweet later. Somewhere between those small subjects, Liv realized that the thought of spending another whole day in the cottage no longer made her restless. It felt, instead, like a gentle invitation to see how much could be contained in a single, snow-wrapped place.
After breakfast, the storm settled into a new kind of rhythm. The sharp edges had been smoothed away during the night. Now the sound of the wind came and went in long, steady waves, rising for a time, filling the spaces between the beams and along the eaves, then receding again, like an enormous breath being taken and released somewhere just beyond the walls. If Liv closed her eyes, it reminded her of the low, constant hum of an old refrigerator or a distant train, present but not demanding attention. A kind of white noise woven through the background of the day. The three of them drifted naturally into the living room, carrying their mugs with them. The rooms in the cottage were not large, and the spaces between them were short. It took only a few steps to go from kitchen table to sofa, from stove to the chair by the window. Yet somehow, this morning the house felt bigger inside than it had the day before, as if the snow pressing in around it had pushed its inner walls outward, giving each corner a little more room to breathe. Solveig settled into her usual armchair with the ease of long habit. A basket of wool sat at her feet, several skeins already begun. She reached down, chose a soft gray-blue thread, and picked up the half-finished mitten she had been working on. The needles clicked together quietly, the sound small but sure, like someone turning pages in a familiar book. Liv's mother took her place at the coffee table. She had brought with her a neat stack of things from a drawer in the sideboard, an old biscuit tin full of photographs, a pile of notebooks with the bakery's name written in careful handwriting on the front, and a folder that contained lists and orders from the months behind and the weeks yet to come.
She opened the biscuit tin first. Inside, the photographs were a mixture of black and white and color, edges slightly curled, corners softened by time. Some were of the town in winters past, the harbor under a pale sky, fishing boats tied up and resting, children in thick jackets climbing snowbanks that in the pictures looked as high as small houses. Others were of birthdays, summer picnics, and quiet afternoons in this very living room, with faces caught mid-laugh or mid-thought. As Liv's mother began to sort through them, making small piles, smoothing out a bent corner here, matching dates there, Liv lowered herself onto the end of the sofa, folding one leg underneath her. For a moment she simply watched them both. If you were listening from outside the story, you might notice how peaceful this scene is. The house wrapped in snow, the older woman in her chair with her knitting, the younger woman at the low table, fingers moving slowly through old photographs and penciled notes, the girl, no longer a child, not yet entirely settled into the idea of being grown, curled up nearby, her attention floating gently between them and the storm. Liv reached for the diary she had brought down from the bedroom without really thinking about it. It lay on the sofa beside her now, the worn cover familiar under her fingertips. She opened it, not to the page she had read aloud the previous afternoon, or even to the one she had found before she fell asleep, but somewhere in the middle, letting it choose its own place to open. The handwriting inside was still unmistakably her own, and yet it wasn't. The loops were larger, less certain. Letters leaned into each other in a way her recent notes did not. The words themselves were simple, even when they were trying to express complicated things. She read quietly, her eyes moving slowly across the lines. A description of a day when the snow had been so deep the school path disappeared, and how she and a friend had pretended they were explorers on a new planet. A list of things that made her happy at 13, including finding hot chocolate waiting when I come back from outside, and the way the fjord looks when it's almost dark but not quite. A short, intense entry about being sure she would never, ever live in a small town when she grew up. She felt a small, wry smile touch her mouth at the last part. After a few pages, she closed the diary again. There was a softness at the center of her chest, a feeling that was not exactly nostalgia and not exactly regret, but something quieter and more spacious than both. She set the book aside on the arm of the sofa, within reach but no longer open, and let her gaze drift toward the shelves along the wall. The shelves in Solveig's living room were modest but full. There were novels in Norwegian and English, arranged more or less by height, a few well-worn cookbooks, and tucked in between the occasional framed photograph or small object from years ago, a smooth stone from a beach, a carved wooden bird. Liv rose, crossed the short distance to the shelves and began running her fingers lightly along the spines. She pulled out a baking book she recognized from her childhood, its cover showing a golden loaf of bread dusted with flour. Inside, the pages were dotted with small stains where butter or batter had once splashed, and in the margins Solveig had occasionally written tiny notes, "Less sugar," or "Elias likes this one," or "Good for freezing." Next to it was a collection of travel essays, the kind she had devoured when she moved to the city. Pages about distant islands and mountain trains and cities with names that rolled smoothly in the mouth. She flipped through that one too, noticing where she had dog-eared corners years ago when going somewhere else had seemed like the only way to find out who she might be.
And then, tucked between two larger volumes, almost invisible at first glance, she saw it. A slim, pale notebook with no title on the spine. It was blank. She knew this even before she opened it, the way you can tell when a book has not yet been read. The cover was unmarked, the edges clean, the pages faintly stiff from waiting. Still, she opened it from the back, just to be sure. The paper inside was smooth and undecorated. No dates, no grocery lists, no measurements written hurriedly in pencil. Just space. She let her thumb brush along the empty lines, one after another, their even, quiet order somehow reassuring. A thought rose in her, gentle and unhurried, that maybe this book didn't have to be for recipes or errands or notes about when to plant the tomatoes in spring. Maybe, if she chose, it could be for the chapter she had sensed beginning last night. Not to replace the old diary, with its 13-year-old fears and hopes, but to sit beside it, to be home to a different kind of question, not where do I escape to next, but how does it feel to stay? She didn't write anything, not yet. Instead, she closed the notebook again and carried it back to the sofa, where she laid it on the cushion beside her, spine aligned carefully with the edge, as if marking a place for something that would arrive later. On the other side of the room, the click of knitting needles paused. In that storm when we were snowed in for weeks, Solveig said, without looking up, we invented entire worlds in this room. Liv glanced over. Worlds? She nodded, eyes fixed on her work as she counted stitches in her head. We made up countries, she said, with their own names and weather and holidays. We drew maps on old envelopes. Your grandfather insisted on designing the flags. A small smile ghosted across her face. And when we ran out of paper, we told each other the stories instead. She looked up at Liv then, the blue-gray yarn resting lightly between her fingers. It's interesting, she added, how big a room can become when you're not allowed to leave it. Liv's mother made an amused noise from behind a small stack of photographs.
And how small a bus can feel when you can't get off, she said. That too, Solveig agreed. The three of them shared a brief, quiet smile. A little later, as the morning moved softly toward midday, they drifted back to the kitchen to tidy away the last traces of breakfast. The radio returned to the corner, its low murmur threading through the clink of dishes and the rush of water at the sink. Liv's mother rinsed the bowls while Liv dried them, the two of them moving around each other in the practiced dance of people who have shared kitchens for many years. Solveig stood at the counter, pressing the last of last night's lefse into an even stack. "Since we are being held hostage by the weather," she said matter-of-factly, "I vote we improve our conditions." "And how do we do that?" Liv asked. "By making the leftovers better," Solveig replied. She warmed a pan on the stove and melted a small piece of butter until it foamed. Then she laid the lefse in one by one, sprinkling them with a little sugar and cinnamon before folding them neatly and letting them crisp at the edges. The smell that rose up was instantly, almost absurdly comforting, sweet and familiar, like childhood breakfasts on slow winter days. When they sat down again, this time with coffee and the sugared lefse, the storm outside seemed even further away. They ate slowly, the thin pancakes crackling faintly under their teeth, sugar dissolving on their tongues. "This is unfair," Liv murmured around a bite. "Being snowed in shouldn't taste this good." "That's the trick," Solveig replied. "If you can't choose the weather, you can at least choose the toppings." After the plates were cleared, her mother reached into the sideboard once more and pulled out a long, flat box that had spent most of the year hidden behind other things. "Aha," she said, "if we are truly not going anywhere today, we may as well finish this." She set it on the table and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a faint smell of cardboard and thyme, were the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle showing a winter scene, a small town beside a fjord, lights glowing in the windows, snow piled on roofs, the sky above it all a soft, deep blue. "We started this 2 years ago," she said, looking at Liv with a knowing tilt of her head. "And then somebody suddenly had to go back to the city for something very important." Liv felt a blush of recognition warm her cheeks. "Right, job interviews or something." "Or something," her mother echoed, amusement in her eyes. They cleared a space on the table and began to spread the pieces out, turning them over so that the picture side faced up. As they worked, their conversation wandered easily. Solveig told them about one of the storms from her youth, when the snow had piled so high against the windows that they had carved little peepholes in the ice on the inside to see the vague shapes of the world beyond. Liv's mother followed one photograph to another, remembering a winter when she had been the one Liv's age, certain that she would never again tolerate being in a place so small, and how, years later, she had found herself bringing her own daughter back here whenever she could. Liv listened, sometimes adding her own small memories of the first time she had seen the fjord frozen over enough to walk on near the shore, of the feeling of returning to the city after Christmas and noticing how the air there smelled different, sharper and busier somehow.
Every now and then, the radio cut through with an update. Snowfall is beginning to lessen in some areas, the announcer said at one point. However, strong winds continue to create drifts and reduced visibility, particularly in higher and more exposed locations. Residents are still advised to remain indoors unless travel is essential. Liv paused with a puzzle piece in her hand, holding it between finger and thumb. "What do they mean by essential?" she asked, almost idly. Her mother considered. "Food," she said. "Medicine. Checking on someone who really needs you." "And what we're doing?" Liv asked, placing the piece and watching it click satisfyingly into place, completing the roof of one of the painted houses. "What category is that?" Solveig picked up another piece and examined its colors. "This," she said slowly, "is what you do so that when the essential moments come, you're not too tired to meet them." She placed her piece, joining the painted snow-covered tree to the rest of its trunk. The answer settled over Liv the way the snow had settled over the town, gently, with no sudden movement. It made sense to her in a way that went deeper than the words. Not every hour had to be about moving, deciding, choosing the next direction. Some hours could be about this, matching sky to sky, listening to stories, letting the hum of the storm become a background lullaby instead of something to resist. From time to time, she drifted back to the sofa, picking up the blank notebook just to feel its weight in her hands. She imagined, without urgency, what might eventually fill it. Little notes about days like this, fragments of conversations, the way the light looked on the snow when the storm finally tired itself out. A list, maybe, of things she loved about this town when she wasn't only visiting it. The bakery's warmth at 5 in the morning, the smell of the sea, the fact that everyone knew who belonged to which door. By early afternoon, the puzzle had transformed from scattered pieces into something that from a distance already resembled the picture on the box. The town in the illustration glowed under its painted snow, lights mirrored faintly in a strip of dark water. The sky above it was almost complete, just a few gaps left where deep blue should be. Liv stood once more and wandered to the window. The snow that was pressed against the glass was still there, heavy and white, but the strip at the top had grown a little wider now. Light spilled through more generously, less filtered by cloud. It wasn't bright. This was still a winter afternoon in the fjord, but there was a suggestion of clarity in it, as if the sky were quietly tidying itself above the town.
She raised her hand and rested her fingertips against the cold pane, feeling the faintest vibration there. The wind hadn't disappeared, but its voice was different again, less insistent, less tangled.
Every now and then, the radio cut through with an update. Snowfall is beginning to lessen in some areas, the announcer said at one point. However, strong winds continue to create drifts and reduced visibility, particularly in higher and more exposed locations. Residents are still advised to remain indoors unless travel is essential. Liv paused with a puzzle piece in her hand, holding it between finger and thumb. "What do they mean by essential?" she asked, almost idly. Her mother considered. "Food," she said. "Medicine. Checking on someone who really needs you." "And what we're doing?" Liv asked, placing the piece and watching it click satisfyingly into place, completing the roof of one of the painted houses. "What category is that?" Solveig picked up another piece and examined its colors. "This," she said slowly, "is what you do so that when the essential moments come, you're not too tired to meet them." She placed her piece, joining the painted snow-covered tree to the rest of its trunk. The answers settled over Liv the way the snow had settled over the town, gently, with no sudden movement. It made sense to her in a way that went deeper than the words. Not every hour had to be about moving, deciding, choosing the next direction. Some hours could be about this: matching sky to sky, listening to stories, letting the hum of the storm become a background lullaby instead of something to resist. From time to time, she drifted back to the sofa, picking up the blank notebook just to feel its weight in her hands. She imagined, without urgency, what might eventually fill it. Little notes about days like this, fragments of conversations, the way the light looked on the snow when the storm finally tired itself out. A list, maybe, of things she loved about this town when she wasn't only visiting it. The bakery's warmth at 5 in the morning, the smell of the sea, the fact that everyone knew who belonged to which door. By early afternoon, the puzzle had transformed from scattered pieces into something that, from a distance, already resembled the picture on the box. The town in the illustration glowed under its painted snow, lights mirrored faintly in a strip of dark water. The sky above it was almost complete, just a few gaps left where deep blue should be. Liv stood once more and wandered to the window. The snow was still there, pressed against the glass, but the strip at the top had grown a little wider. Light spilled through more generously now, less filtered by cloud. It wasn't bright. This was still a winter afternoon in the fjord, but there was a suggestion of clarity in it, as if the sky were quietly tidying itself up above the town. She raised her hand and rested her fingertips against the cold pane, feeling the faintest vibration there. The wind hadn't disappeared, but its voice was different again, less insistent, less tangled. From the radio came another calm announcement. Some areas are now reporting a gradual decrease in wind speed. Crews will continue to work through the afternoon to clear major routes. Please continue to remain indoors where possible and allow time for conditions to improve. Liv watched the snow for a moment longer. She felt unexpectedly not a surge of impatience, but a kind of quiet curiosity about what the world would look like when they finally opened the door, about how high the drifts would be, how the familiar path to the gate might have changed shape, about the way the town would sound under all that white. For now, though, it felt all right to turn away from the window and go back to the table, to the almost finished puzzle, to the pieces that still needed a place. The world outside the cottage might have shrunk down to a circle of whiteness and wind, but inside, the day kept gently unfolding, one small task, one shared story, one warm drink at a time, making the little world within these walls feel larger with every quiet hour that passed. It was some time after they had placed the last pieces of deep blue sky into the jigsaw puzzle that Liv noticed the change. At first, it was only a feeling. She was sitting back on her heels, hands resting on her thighs, looking down at the almost finished picture of the little town by the fjord. The painted snow in the illustration lay smooth and undisturbed, the windows glowing softly in the dark. It looked very much like their own town might look, if only they could see it. The hum of the storm outside had become familiar background music by then, a steady, low rush they no longer needed to listen to directly. But in the middle of placing a small, stubborn piece that insisted on hiding among the others, Liv became aware of something. The pauses were longer. Where the wind had been a constant presence all morning, it now seemed to ebb a little each time, leaving pockets of quieter air behind it. She held very still, head tilted slightly, and waited. The house creaked in its usual way. Somewhere in the kitchen, the clock ticked. A faint drip came from the branch hanging above the porch, where snow had begun to melt and refreeze along a twig. And then, instead of another long rush, there was just stillness. A soft, expectant stillness, like the pause between someone taking a breath in and letting it out. She rose and crossed to the window. The snow pressed against the glass was still there, heavy and white, but the strip at the top had grown a little wider. Light spilled through more generously now.
less filtered by cloud. It wasn't bright. This was still a winter afternoon in the fjord, but there was a suggestion of clarity in it, as if the sky were quietly tidying itself up above the town. She raised her hand and rested her fingertips against the cold pane, feeling the faintest vibration there. The wind hadn't disappeared, but its voice was different again, less insistent, less tangled. What was sure, though, was that the stillness right then was real.
And so for tonight we'll leave Liv safe and warm in the little house above the fjord, the storm whispering softly around the walls, and tomorrow still wrapped in snow. In our next story, we'll return to this winter morning and spend another slow, gentle day with Liv, her mother, and Solveig as the storm begins to fade, the snow world opens again, and a familiar visitor finally arrives at the door. But for now, there is nothing else you need to do. Let your body grow heavy, let your thoughts drift like snowflakes, and allow this quiet, wintry cottage to fade softly into the background of your dreams. Sleep well, and good night.